and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. We'll be diving into some economic news here in a little bit. There's a lot going on right now. One article I have is the stock market now too big to fail? I have a couple other ones. I have one here, jobs miss. Another one, record 94 million Americans not in labor force participation rate, lowest since 1977. Record 56,253,000 women not working. Stocks plunge after payrolls report. Rate fake Greenspan baffled by intense focus on Fed first hike. So that'll definitely be something we'll dive into. And I had another one. Give me a second here. Let me find it now. They didn't drop it off the front page here. Okay. Something that's been kind of in the news, this clerk that has been denying marriage certificates for gays. This one was jailed for refusing marriage license. Kentucky, U.S. Today, Kentucky clerk jailed for refusing to issue marriage license. Says here, a Kentucky county clerk was found in contempt of court Thursday for her refusal to issue marriage license in the wake of the Supreme Court decision to allow gays to wed. U.S. District Court Judge David Bunning sent Rowan County Kim Davis to jail until she complies. More than 100 protesters gathered outside the courthouse to bolster both sides of the debate. Demonstrators lined the streets waving their signs, either with the religious message or calls for marriage equality. One man stood in the crowd shouting over a microphone, "We want to live like Sodom and Gomorrah. God will punish us like Sodom and Gomorrah." He said, where in Genesis 19:23 through 26, God rained burning sulfur on the land. of the two cities, destroying all who live there. All 300 seats in the courtroom filled quickly, and those inside are not allowed to have cell phone access until the hearing is over. And don't mind the extreme thunder you've been hearing, if you can hear it. It's just rumbling. Says here, the Orlando-based Liberty Counsel, whose lawyers are representing Davis, said in a court filing Wednesday that she should not be found in contempt because lesser measures could achieve the same goal. Those include authorizing the state to issue marriage licenses or allowing someone other than a county's clerk to sign them. Rowan County Clerk Kim Davis listened to a customer September 1st. Oh, it's in the picture. Ashley Hogue, a secretary from Ashland, held a sign outside the courthouse that read, "Kim Davis does not speak for my religious beliefs." "This is so ugly," she said, wiping away tears. "I was unprepared for all the hate." Demonstrator Charles Rami, a retired steelworker, downplayed the vitriol. "We don't hate these people," he said. "We wouldn't tell them how to get saved if we hated them." Davis, who calls herself an apostolic Christian, has said she cannot issue license to same-sex couples because it conflicts with her religious beliefs. "I have no animosity towards anyone and harbor no ill will," she said in a previous statement through her lawyers. "To me, this has never been a gay or lesbian issue. It's about marriage and God's word." I want to stop there in that article, USA Today. Now, I think there's a bigger issue that should be brought up here, and you don't hear much mainstream talk about it. And it's the issuing of licenses by government. Now, if government wants to say, well, you should have a license, well, then churches can apply for, file paperwork saying that they're going to give licenses. It should never be under the control of government in the first place. Government should not be involved in marriages, should not be involved in the churches, and we're really seeing the opposite of that. I have a Ron Paul Liberty report here. Prisoner of conscience, the case of Kentucky clerk.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Daniel McAdams is with me today. Daniel, nice to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
There's a hot case going on out in Kentucky right now. It's caught the attention of the entire country. It has to do with a clerk who will not issue licenses for gay marriages. And she's in a lot of trouble, and she claims it's her religious belief that she should not do this. And now it looks like she's in prison by a federal judge for an indefinite period of time because the law doesn't, explicitly say what the penalty is. And she didn't have her day in court. This sounds a little bit outrageous, as important as the issue may be. This penalty seems to be the issue itself, or should be the issue itself. How can a judge do this? And they haven't really concentrated a whole lot on the extremism of our federal judicial system.
Well, they said that putting her in prison for contempt is not a punitive matter. It's simply a matter of coercion. You will stay in prison until you do what we say you should. It almost sounds like something out of an authoritarian or totalitarian system.
That sounds like it's cruel and unusual punishment, and it sounds like a bit of torture. I think many people would feel like if they're put in a cell, in a cage, never knowing what the future will bring, that would be torturous. That could be pretty bad. No, it's not pulling out your fingernails, but it can be pretty devastating. But the whole issue here is, this whole idea of the court deciding on the states how they should run their licensing for marriage. And it's all stemmed from that. And with their infinite wisdom, they've decided that they will instruct in minute detail exactly what people can do at the state level. So I happen to see that as a major problem right there.
The problem is people that agree with the decision are happy with what the court said. The people who disagree with it are ready to defy. And nobody's really talking about the larger issue that you bring up, which is what is the role of the courts in our society, in our constitutional republic?
Well, it's really the role of the federal government in our system. And, of course, the federal government is totally out of control. This case certainly ignores the fact of the relationship between the federal government. But I see this as a problem somewhat like I've used the analogy about a school system. See, I don't think there's an easy answer for this because I don't think, as a libertarian, I don't believe in any prohibitions or coercions. To me, this is on the side of coercion, telling people what they must do. But if there was an absolute prohibition against the association of gay people, that would be very, very bad too. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's somewhat like, how do you solve the problem of a school district that has to decide what kind of books to read? And once you get the government involved in deciding what kind of books you can read, I mean, there's going to be a lot of different opinions. How are you going to satisfy everybody? How are you going to satisfy the socialists and the free market people in teaching economics? So I think once government gets involved, it's a can of worms what they really open.
Yeah, and the issue really is the idea of religious belief as an exemption, a basis of exemption for carrying out the law. And I don't think this is a religious issue. I mean, it's motivating the lady for not wanting to do this, but it has a lot to do with our legal system and what rights are and what people can do or can't do. And it's totally ignoring the voluntary association, because much of what is happening now in this new civil rights movement is coercion by federal edict. 5-4, one justice can change the whole world and say, you're not allowed to pick your customers anymore. If they come in and tell you that you have to bake a cake, they don't say it. But if they told you had to bake a cake with a swastika on, well, that would be bad. But if you do something else, then they say, I have the right to tell this individual. So to me, it's totally out of control on the judicial system, interfering with the voluntary associations. And that, I think, is where the trouble really begins. And I think the people who agree with the Supreme Court decision, the pro-gay marriage people, don't understand that this 5-4 changing of the world can very easily go the other way in the future with a different composition of the court. You can think of anything imaginable. So if the legislative branch and even the executive branch is sidelined, things could actually turn out very badly for them as well. Yeah,
and do you think that if the argument should be settled by just talking about states' right, would this have prevented this? It seems like it could have been helpful in preventing this, but that's so old-fashioned, and it's people who say states' rights, you're totally discredited. You're not talking about the original republic anymore. You're talking about being a mean, vicious, bigoted person. If you say that the states actually have some authority. Might say, well, the state should have authority on allowing us to smoke marijuana. Yeah. So it's so inconsistent.
And that was really one of this woman's arguments, Kim Davis's arguments, is that she was elected by
wanted to. I think there are some people who just love confrontation. And when you see the strife and the racial strife we have, sometimes it's confrontation that they want, and they're less concerned about really, particular lives that they're talking about. And I think the confrontation could have been avoided, even under these circumstances, and just said, well, the office is right here, but email this office down the street or over the next county or something like that. It could have easily been adjusted, but there is no desire. It's almost like in-your-face stuff. But there are people on both sides of this argument, people who are religious, would almost like to have a theocracy, and they're in their face with some of their arguments too. But those who are arguing this aren't looking for a balanced solution, even though I happen to believe there are ways that we could avoid this.
Well, there are only 3 of the 120 Kentucky County clerks that have resisted, so clearly there were plenty of other options. And, our friend Lou Rockwell wrote about it as a kind of Jacobinism, that this woman has to be made an example of. She has to go to the guillotine for this. But
well, symbolically, she's suffering. There's no doubt about it.
But you have a solution to all this problem. We wouldn't even be talking about this if they'd followed your solution.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I wrote about this in Liberty Defined in my book, and the best thing is to get the government out of the way. When we lived in a more tolerant world, we solved these problems locally, like the book issue at the local level in schools. Yeah, imperfectly because it was government, and that local community sort of dictated what kind of books there were. But now we live in a confrontational society, and everybody expects the government to take care of them, and we're broke, and it's an economic issue. Matter of fact, this is even an economic issue. So it's back and forth. So we don't come up with reasonable solutions under imperfect circumstances. But if we wanted to avoid this, even in public schools, one way, we don't have this argument when they come to my homeschooling group or when you go to a private school. You can go to a Catholic, Protestant, or secular school. You don't go in there and argue about the books. But as soon as the state does it, then there's this argument. So the state really shouldn't be involved. And I've always had trouble with this because I'm a true civil libertarian, but I'm also one that I don't think the government should be used to change the natures of people's thinking and changing definition of words where the definitions may have been around for quite a few years and just say, you will accept my definition, and all this. So why can't the solution simply be get the government out of the business of marriage? Have it a contract. Everybody can have a contract, and the courts can protect the contract. But this whole idea, and this hasn't been this way forever. There was a time when you got married in the church and the marriage was written down in the Bible, and you could trace that even now. You can trace back marriages many centuries because they were listed in certain Bibles. So it just seems like another argument against big government getting in the way and trying to impose their will on us.
Several people have pointed out that the whole idea of the state registering marriages goes back to the idea of segregation, where the state was preventing whites and blacks from marrying, and so they wanted to put a hand in it. So it's kind of interesting that it has its roots in kind of a racism. There's one thing I wanted to read to you because I can't resist it. This is, the White House had to, of course, weigh in on this. And I think everyone watching is going to get a big laugh. But this is White House spokesman Josh Earnest. And this is the White House's point on Kim Davis. Nobody is above the law. That applies to the President of the United States, and that applies to the county clerk of Rowan County, Kentucky. So we're thinking about Hillary, and we're thinking about all of these mishandling of documents and things, and illegal wars.
Most people, libertarians, even believe there should be a type of rule of law. Some don't, but the rule of law doesn't mean you accept all the bad laws. I mean, this would be sort of, if you take that position, you love the British. You love living under the tyranny of the king, and you should never fight the bad laws and the tea tax and all these other things. Just accept it and roll over. But there is a time when people have to stand up. And, the judge also said something which was rather disgusting. I'm sure our friend Judge Napolitano would have a pretty strong answer for this. The judge mocked this whole idea about natural law. That there might be a superior law about the rights of life and liberty, and that isn't given to us by government. That's given to us by a higher law. And he said natural law is very, very dangerous. He says that would endanger our whole judicial system if they had to follow, morality in law. But I think it's an example of where we're going. I think we're going to see more of this kind of things. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and hopefully we come to our senses. I don't imagine my solution of getting the government out of marriage will come soon. But there are some other options even under these circumstances. You say, well, if there's a voluntary association, what if there are benefits from the government? How do you get them if you don't say you're married, because married couple get these benefits? And I think this is a concern for some who are pushing for this legislation. Well, first thing is there shouldn't be the benefits, but we're not going to be able to deal with that. Those benefits are going to be around for a long time. But the other thing is if you really were sincere in doing this and you wanted to protect one thing the Constitution should help us with the Fifth Amendment is voluntary contracts and property. That would solve a lot of our problems. But if you have the government imposing their will on us like this, I do not see how we can solve this problem whatever. And that is really the big problem that we have today. So I think the will that the people have should be that we should resist bad laws. If it's civil disobedience, you do it at risk. But 90% of everything I saw, maybe more, that I saw in Washington, all the laws and all the court rulings had nothing to do with the Constitution other than a violation of the Constitution. So we should resist laws and we should point it out. And I don't think if we narrow this down and say this is part of religious freedom and it's our First Amendment right, I think that's way too narrow. It's freedom that we have to legalize, and legalizing freedom of choice, and I always talk a lot about in a free society for it to work, you have to have a lot of tolerance. So if people might use their freedom in a different way, and they may offend you in their sexual habits or their other kind of habits, gambling habits or whatever, but you have to be tolerant about this. But the free society and liberty solve these problems. It's the opposite. And since we've gone in the extreme opposite, and we have way too many laws. I mean, just think of all the do-gooders who have been passing these drug laws. Just recently, somebody in prison was sentenced for 20 years for marijuana. He finally gets out after 20 years. I keep thinking, who are the people? What should happen to the people who preach these laws and pass these laws and put people in prison under these vile circumstances? I think that the message ought to be, even here, there's way too much government, way too much federal government. We need a better understanding in liberty, better understanding about voluntary contracts, and believe me, we wouldn't be dealing with cases like this. But I think they're going to get worse, but the economy is going to get worse, and there's going to be more competition, and one side is going to use any chance they have to be in the face of the others, and that's why I worry a bit about what's going to happen in the not immediate, in the future shortly, because I don't see the resolutions coming. But the solutions can be found in the cause of liberty. Make no doubt about it, that is the side that I am on. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Go check them out. And, you know, this is a very, very big problem in society that we have government involved in so much. Whether it be business, gay marriage, the abortion, all this. Where does the factor come into play where all this becomes relevant to so many people that, you know, don't involve themselves in it? And it comes from the forcing of people to participate, basically. You know, when the tax money gets sent to Planned Parenthood, an organization that pro-life people despise, but you force them to help pay them. They get basically subsidies. You have government telling bakers they have to bake cakes. You have government basically forcing an issue to the point where it becomes hatred. You know, before, let's say Planned Parenthood existed, was a private company, never got a dollar from the government, didn't get a tax break, who would care? How about this? No one paid taxes, business or people. You could pay into a national defense fund where its sole purpose is for national defense of free people, never allowed to do any offensive measures, to always be a step ahead in defense. People wouldn't care what other people did so much. There's a reason you care so much about certain things. Because you're forced to be involved in it. And like Ron Paul said, just the main issue here is, government is involved in too much crap. It does not endorse freedom. It does the opposite. And then you look at the economy. Let me bring up some of these articles. This one originally out of Washington's blog. It's on Infowars.com too. Is the stock market now too big to fail? It says here, correspondent Bart D. recently speculated that the U.S. stock market was too big to fail. That is, that it was too integral to the global financial system and economy to be allowed to fail. Declined 40+% as in previous bubble bursts. The U.S. stock market is integral to the global financial system in two ways. Now that investment banks, pension funds, insurers, and multitudes of 401k retirement plans are dependent on current equity valuations, a crash would impair virtually the entire spectrum of finance, from hedge funds to banks to insurers to pension plans. A decimation of these sectors would impact the U.S. economy and thus the global economy very negatively. By turning the health of the economy into a reflection of the stock market, the status quo has made the stock market into one bellwether that matters. In effect, the stock market is now integral to the economy as a measure of sentiment and evidence that all is well with the economy as a whole. The stock market is now the signal everyone follows. If stocks are rising, we're told that means the economy is healthy. Conversely, if stocks decline sharply, the implication is the economy is weak. Now, many of us don't believe that. We've never believed it. We've always said the stock market does not reflect the economy. The economy, when this stock started going back up, the workforce, the economy, none of that was getting that much better. Not the way the stock market was reflecting. Stock market was reflecting, wow, we're just starting to do so great. We weren't. That was the bubble. The illusion that we're becoming better. They think, well, if we raise the stock market, then everybody will think the economy is doing better and they'll invest. They don't have anything to invest. That's the problem. The companies that do have anything to invest, the big corporations, they're holding on to their money because they don't believe the economy is getting better. They're not investing because they know that there's no one else investing out there. They're not going to just pour their money in to a bleeding market. They'll invest all this money and know that it doesn't go anywhere because the economy is getting worse, when the stock market was saying it was getting better according to that belief. but most of us haven't believed that. So it's pretty big words there. In other words, it's just not valuations that make stocks integral to the economy. And status quo of the market seemingly is now the key to sentiment. And economics, Michael Spence's work, the information available to participants is as metric. Roughly speaking, those on the inside have better information than those on the outside. The stock market addresses this asymmetry by signaling what's really going on via price. Sorry, this browser's kind of freezing up here. If the market sell-off, that tells even those with little other information that all is not well in the economy. A rising market sends the opposite signal, everything's going well. I think a rising market sends the signal to unaware people that will go out there and spend dollars thinking their job's going to be fine tomorrow, not knowing the truth. So it kind of bleeds off the upper middle class that's doing pretty well. It helps bleed their dollars off because then they're willing to spend the money. This explains why a rising stock market is now central to the status quo. If the market reverses, everyone who sees mostly stagnation in their corner of the economy will realize that it is the norm, not a local aberration. If the stock market is now too big to fail, the Federal Reserve will have to prop it up, whatever the cost. Ultimately, this may require indirect purchases of stock, an action that other central banks are already pursuing directly or indirectly via proxies. Yeah, and those economies aren't doing well. Federal Reserve or governments or central banks buying up stock does not produce anything. I have another article here. So on the front of Drudge, jobs miss. Well, I'll go over that one here. Stocks plunge after payrolls report. Stocks drop about 3% per week. China Fed eyed. And this is out of CNBC.com. U.S. stocks closed more than 1% lower Friday ahead of a long weekend as uncertainty about the timing of a rate hike and Chinese economic growth continued to weigh. The major averages ended off session lows, but still log losses of about 3% or more for the week. You've got a buyer's strike and a lot of buyers anxious to get out ahead of a long weekend, ahead of pent-up news out of China, said Art Hogan, chief market strategist for Wunderlich Securities. Mainland Chinese stock markets reopened Monday after a 4-day weekend and ahead of several regional reports on trade and inflation due next week. U.S. stock markets are closed Monday for Labor Day holiday. I think it's a combination of continued jitters overseas, said Bill Stone, chief investment strategist at PNC Asset Management. China was closed, but Japan wasn't. That and Europe set us off on a bad start. European stocks extended losses to close more than 2% lower following the employment report. Mainland Chinese stocks were closed for a second straight day for a public holiday. The Nike closed down 2.15%. The Hang Seng declined 0.4%. Stone noted the jobs report is also probably not enough to settle the riddle on when the Fed will move. PNC expects a hike in September or at least sometime later in 2015. Dow Jones Industrial Average closed about 272 points lower after earlier falling 348 points, with DuPont and Goldman Sachs the greatest blue chip decliners. Materials and financials lost more than 1.5% to lead all 10 S&P 500 sectors lower. The S&P 500 closed on the edge of correction territory off 10% from its 52-week high. The NASDAQ Composite and Dow closed in correction territory. On balance, I think the report was a good one. And if we weren't in the middle of market volatility and global turmoil, we'd be set for a hike in September, said Liz Ann Saunders, chief investment strategist at Charles Schwab. You look at our market, anything that they talk about in stocks going up, and you can read the rest of that at CNBC. But you look at this, and they really just don't want to look at the full picture about every time this is happening, we're losing more jobs and we don't regain them. When they say, oh, we got gains in jobs, you don't hear the big picture all the time. You don't hear how many of those jobs are just part-time jobs. You don't hear how many of those jobs are going to be seasonal jobs. They'll just tell you as a broad picture that jobs are up. We've employed this many more people. Don't talk about the ones that are lost. When they finally do go into detail, most people aren't listening anymore. And they do that for a reason. We know they do that for a reason. Mainstream media likes to do that. Definitely when they push a lot of BS and then come back, a week later and go, we got that wrong. But in other news, a cat fell out of a tree. Okay, give me a second here. I had another clip to play. Sorry, give me a second here. Okay, I don't seem to want to go, so we'll skip that. Okay, we'll just go ahead and move along here. Let's get into some politics here. I have one here, and this is out of truthandmedia.com. Donegan, RNC loyalty oath goes too far by asking candidates to endorse unknown nominee. It sets a dangerous precedent for the Republican National Committee to ask all 2016 GOP presidential candidates to sign a pledge promising to support the eventual nominee, no matter who it is, so early in the process and with so many candidates with unknown views in the race. Donald Trump's refusal to rule out an independent presidential run during the first GOP debate of the 2016 election season put Republican Party officials in a legitimate bind. What happens if Trump or another candidate uses the GOP's political infrastructure, donor funds, and primary debates as a launch pad for an independent run against the party's eventual nominee, ultimately spoiling the race in favor of the Democrats? If that were to happen, Reince Priebus, Republican National Committee chairmanship, would be viewed as an epic failure. However, in using the party's sponsorship of and control over officially recognized Republican presidential primary debates as leverage to pressure all candidates into signing a loyalty pledge, the RNC has set a dangerous precedent. Now the expectation is that in order to get into the Republican Party's official presidential debates, each candidate must sign an oath promising not only to swear off an independent run, but also to blindly pre-endorse any of a long list of candidates prior to even debating all of them on the same stage and determine what their positions are. That should be alarming considering the fact that there are 17 announced candidates in the season's primary. In fact, in circulating the loyalty pledge so early in the election season, the RNC has asked Republican candidates to sign an oath promising to support the party's nominee at a time with candidates filing deadlines still looming, when it might still technically be possible for another candidate to enter the race. In a crowded field, a candidate whose views do not speak for large segments of the party could prevail, forcing single-issue activist candidates to endorse a nominee that one day one of his or her presidency would begin working against them, and conceivably the entire party, on issues. Also, a candidate like Donald Trump, who was a Democrat just a few short years ago, could, in theory, change his mind on positions at the last minute. The loyalty oath as a concept will offend Tea Party and Libertarian activists who see it as a tool by establishment figures to put the party's brand over its issues. Republican in name only has become a commonly used pejorative among center-right leaning activist circles to describe brand-focused Republicans who ditch their principles for whatever position polls well after they stealth into office by bamboozling the GOP base into carrying the election for them. You can read the rest of that at truthmedia.com. Give me a second here. Pull up this article. Sorry about that. I had an article here, but it does not want to pop up. Try this one more time. Okay, I have one here. This one's Rand Paul. President Trump would be a disaster for the country. Appearing on CNN, Senator Rand Paul continued his feud with fellow GOP campaigner Donald Trump, stating that the billionaire would be a disaster for the country and a disaster for our party. I don't think you want a nominee who offends whole areas of the public, whole ethnic groups, Paul said, referring to Trump's comments about most immigrants from Mexico being rapists and criminals as painting with a broad brush and crazy talk. I think most people who immigrated to this country are assets to our communities and came here seeking the American dream the same way my ancestors did, Paul said. Trump hit back at Paul by suggesting that he should be cut from the upcoming GOP debates because there are too many candidates. And I'm going to play that short clip here from CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We have some breaking news here at CNN. The Kentucky clerk, the county clerk in Kentucky, who refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples, has now been ordered by a federal judge to be taken into custody. This happened just moments ago. This was a federal judge who, again, issued that order for clerk Kim Davis, who has reportedly refused, despite court intervention, to go ahead and award those marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Joining me now from Capitol Hill, we have Kentucky Senator, this is very appropriate, and Republican presidential candidate Rand Paul. Senator, you just heard that news. What's your reaction to this? I know that you've come out in support of Kim Davis, but with this news, what's your take?
Well, I think it's absurd to put someone in jail for exercising their religious liberty. If you want to convince people that same-sex marriage is something that's acceptable, I would say try to persuade people. But, if we're going to use the federal government and we're going to get involved in every state, locality, what's going to happen? It's going to harden people's resolve on this issue. There'll be no open-mindedness on this. And I think it's a real mistake to be doing this. I think what's going to happen as a result of this is states and locality are just going to opt out of the marriage business completely. Her heartfelt religious conviction is that this isn't kind of marriage that she approves of. My understanding is that she will file a contract. If two adults have a contract, she'll file it. She just doesn't want to have a signature, her signature on it, showing her approval. I see no reason why there couldn't be a compromise where we couldn't have a notary of the republic, a notary of the public, certify the contract, and she simply files it. My understanding is she will do that she doesn't want to give her imprimatur to a type of marriage that she objects to. And this is really the problem when, from on high, from the federal level, we decide to get involved with a situation that has always, throughout the history of our country, been a local issue.
What do you think about Carly Fiorina's take on this? She has said, like you, that she respects Miss Davis's beliefs, her religious beliefs, but she also says she's a government employee and she should be executing the will of the government, and if she doesn't want to do that, then she should get a new job.
Well, I think one thing we haven't debated enough is what actually is the law. Is the law that every county clerk in Kentucky has to sign a marriage certificate? Is a notary of the public, is that sufficient? Is the clerk's job to execute and to file contracts, or is it to sign their approval? I think there's a lot of different ways around this that don't lead to conflict, that lead to more time when people can try to persuade others of their opinion on what marriage should be. But I think this is a real mistake. And even those on the other side of the issue, those who want to support a new definition for marriage, I think it sets their movement back because it's seen as that the federal government's going to come in with bully force and here even with police power and incarcerate people who disagree or who still believe in the traditional notion of marriage. So I think this is a huge mistake, and it's a step back even for those who do want to redefine marriage.
I want to talk to you about something that you said this week about heroin addiction. Here's what you said.
We have a lot of problems, and people always come up to me and say, we got heroin problems and all these other problems. You know what? If you work all day long, you don't have time to do heroin.
All right. Well, that joke received by the crowd there, but this morning on CNN's New Day, your opponent, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, said it was insulting. And he said that it's not facing the reality that addiction is a disease. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, the problem with short clips is it didn't carry the whole discussion. And I discussed at least 10 times in New Hampshire this weekend that I do believe we should treat the addiction, and we shouldn't really treat it as an incarceration problem. I'm not for locking up drug addicts. I am for rehabilitation. I'm also a lead co-sponsor of a bill with Senator Markey that would allow doctors who treat drug addicts to see more patients. Currently, there's a bizarre federal law that limits how many people who are addicted can be seen by one doctor. My bill would expand doctors' ability to treat addiction, but also include nurse practitioners and others who are certified in drug treatment. So, no, you pick out a snippet of me trying to be funny and you don't listen, or the inclination is that, well, this is really what my position is on drug addiction. But if you listen to more of the speech, you'll find that my position is I think we should save money on incarceration and actually spend it on drug rehabilitation.
All right, and Senator, as you know, this pledge, the loyalty pledge, this is all the buzz today in politics with your field. You have called Donald Trump a fake conservative. You said this week that if Trump wins the nomination, the GOP would suffer its biggest defeat since Barry Goldwater lost to Lyndon Johnson in 1964. Have you signed the loyalty pledge? And if Donald Trump were to be the nominee, would you support him?
I'll support whoever the nominee is, and I will sign the pledge. I signed a pledge when I ran for Senate because, frankly, you need all of the Republicans to come together. I do think Donald Trump would be a disaster for the country and a disaster for our party, and I think we'd suffer the worst defeat since 1964. The reason is I don't think you want a nominee that offends whole areas of the public, whole ethnic groups. If you paint with a broad brush and you want to say, well, most Hispanics are drug dealers and they're rapists and murderers, well, that's crazy talk, and that offends a whole segment of our population. I think most people who immigrated to this country are assets to our community and came here seeking the American dream, the same way my ancestors did. Are there some people who break the law? Absolutely. And should they be treated and punished? Absolutely. But the thing is I think painting with a broad brush that all immigrants are bad people is a terrible thing to say, and it's going to be a disaster for our party. I also think Trump is a fake conservative because he's not really supported any conservative notions. He's for raising your taxes. He's been for Obamacare, and he's also been for taking private property from small property owners and giving it to him. That's why he pays so much money for politicians, is so he can get them to take people's property through eminent domain, and then he absorbs it into his casino business. So I don't think there's anything conservative about Trump. I think ultimately when conservatives find out that he's a fake conservative, they're going to reevaluate the race.
I want to ask you, Senator, about this migrant crisis in Europe. It's been going on for some time now, hundreds of thousands of people seeking refuge there from Syria, from Iraq. But it seems very much in the consciousness now of Americans because of this just horrible, horrific photo that we've seen of a young boy who died in the process of trying to escape Syria. What do you think about how the United States should be involved in this, and if the U.S. should take in any refugees?
I don't think there are any easy answers as far as how we, stop war and stop famine around the world, and so it will probably continue to occur. The one thing I think we should do in the Middle East, though, that could make maybe some of these wars less harmful is I don't think we should be arming people who hate us. I think it's sad and it's a travesty that ISIS now has $1 billion worth of U.S. Humvees. They ride around in our tanks. They have our weapons. They have anti-tank weapons. And I think that's a mistake because we got involved in the Syrian civil war and we got on the side of al-Qaeda and ISIS, which I think was a terrible tragedy and a terrible mistake by President Obama. We are a welcoming nation and we have accepted a lot of refugees, and I think we will continue to do so. But we also can't accept the whole world. So there are some limits. I also think that those who come to our country, we need to get them to assimilate into our country. And I don't think it's a good idea to develop whole populations within the U.S. Who really don't like the U.S. So I think we have to be selective and careful. And we are a welcoming country, but we just can't take everybody.
You think the U.S. should play a part in this, though? Because obviously, Germany, a lot of other European countries are trying to figure out a way to accommodate some of these refugees. You see the U.S. fitting into that effort?
Well, part of the way we can be helpful in the effort is not by furthering and making the war worse in that region of the world, because they flee the famine and the disaster of war. And,
but at
we
this
got
point,
involved
Senator,
in the
they're
Syrian
fleeing.
civil war.
I'm just trying to get a sense. They are fleeing at this point. These refugees specifically at this point in time, where we know a lot of them are held up at certain parts of the border in Europe. Should the U.S. play a role in that, or should the U.S. be looking more to Europe to deal with this?
Well, the people who live there will obviously have a bigger stake in accepting refugees, but we have been a very generous nation, and we have accepted a lot of refugees. We've already accepted refugees from Syria. We accepted a lot from Somalia. But we've also run into some problems with accepting so many refugees that we take some of the people who could help rebuild the country. We did this with Iraq, where we won the war, but then we accepted 60,000 Iraqi refugees into our country, some of which wish us harm and have tried to attack us. Same way with Somalia. We've received so many immigrants and refugees from Somalia that many of them are part of the faction that has actually gone back to Syria to fight against us. So I think we do have to be careful with this, and we should have a warm and welcoming heart, but we also just can't accept the whole world to come here either.
All right, Senator Rand Paul, thank you so much for talking with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
For the latest in politics and...
Okay. Now we look at that whole issue in Somalia and stuff. We're going to run into problems just like any country, just like our country. We have bad people, we have good people, and we need to treat organizations and then the individuals in how they act and how they follow orders, and it gets really down to people need to start distancing themselves from groups. Really, you can be a friend of everybody in the manner of just respecting their rights. And you don't have to like how they live or, involve in that type of living, but just respecting each other's rights would get rid of a lot of the hate out there. But you have people like Trump who they're playing off of that hate that's being created in the U.S. And a lot of people go, he's saying things that people need to be saying, but he's saying it in a way that same type of rhetoric, if you really, really listen to how he speaks, just imagine him saying those same words instead of laughing all the time, saying it in an angry way. It would pretty closely match a lot of the rhetoric that Hitler used. And it's divide to conquer, and the tools are there in government now to divide and conquer. So, we really have to watch, just because you get angry because now, your taxpayer money is being used to give welfare to illegal immigrants. Well, don't be mad at the illegal immigrants that, are coming to a different country that offers better chances, and government runs up to them and goes, here, sign this paper. Here's your card for food, and here's your driver's license. Be mad at government for stealing your money and then giving it away to people. There's so much about that is what gets that hatred going, and then you have people like Trump that play off of it and benefit off of it at the same time. So they're really hypocrites. Now, let's get into a little bit from the left side of it. Here's a title here on Drudge Report, Damage Control, Too Many Judges, State Department says of Clinton emails. And this is on rollcall.com. The government asked a federal court Thursday to assign to a single judge the cases involving Hillary Rodham Clinton's use of private email server during her stint as Secretary of State. Clinton's email saga has sparked more than 30 public records lawsuits assigned to 17 different judges in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. The emails are also likely to contain records responsive to hundreds of Freedom of Information requests not currently in litigation. Congress has slashed State Department appropriations for the task. The government cited those statistics in its motion, the district court asking for one judge to handle all the cases. The motion illustrates how much the trove of emails to and from the Democratic presidential candidate has captured the attention of the media, government watchdogs, and criticism from Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Different judges in the district court are being asked to impose a variety of search regimes, resulting in a hodgepodge of orders directing how state manages the search and production of the emails, the government said. The result is confusion, inefficiencies, and advantages given to some requesters at the expense of others, the government states. The appointment of a coordinating judge not only would avoid these results, but would assist state in its efforts to complete production of the documents produced by former Secretary Clinton by the end of January 2016. One judge could ensue conflicting orders aren't entered and could take into account the demands on a State Department whose Freedom of Information Act processing resources are overextended, the motion said. The agency is under orders from one judge to release to the public 53,000 pages worth of 30,000 Clinton emails by January 2016. The State Department wants to model the approach on the designation of one judge, Thomas F. Hogan, to coordinate and manage more than 100 actions involving habeas petitions for Guantanamo Bay detainees. The department pointed out that Congress has reduced funding by 16% since sequestering in fiscal 2013 for diplomatic and consular programs, ongoing operations, which funds the department's Freedom of Information Act program. At the same time, annual federal pay raises and overseas inflation are increasing annual operating costs by at least 3% per year, the government said. What's not helping, the document review platform the department uses can't ingest most forms of electronic data. Because of that, most potentially responsive documents must first be printed and then scanned into the system, even if documents are received electronically, the department states. And again, that's at rollcall.com. I think there's something bigger behind it. They can't control that many judges. And it's causing a lot of them to stay on their butts about producing this stuff. And I think a lot of it, but we got to, make sure the national security is not, leaked through all this. So, well, if you got to cover that much of these emails and redact stuff so much, then I'm taking it there's quite a bit of classified information. And you can't tell me that all of these, emails weren't classified when she sent or received them. And we've seen things come out, and, we have her aide basically pleading the fifth. It's looking more and more like a cover-up. And then I have another one here. It's a 3.5-minute clip here. Reality check: DNC rigging debate process to favor Clinton. So let's go ahead and dive into this.
Hillary Clinton is struggling to get momentum behind her 2016 campaign. And no, I'm not just talking about the email scandal. For Clinton, there is also a huge enthusiasm gap. And now one Democratic candidate for president says the DNC is actually rigging the game for Clinton. Is it true? This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else.
4 debates. 4 debates. 4 debates and 4 debates only, we are told, not asked before voters in our earliest states make their decision. This sort of rigged process has never been attempted before. 1 debate in Iowa? That's it? 1 debate in New Hampshire? That's all we can afford?
Yeah, that was 2016 Democratic presidential candidate and former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley. On Friday, O'Malley stood before the DNC and he demanded to know why, while the Republican Party was going through what he called a reality show of a debate process, the Democratic Party is hiding.
Whose decree is this exactly? Where did it come from? To what end? For what purpose?
So what exactly is O'Malley's beef? Well, the Democratic National Committee, they are the entity setting the criteria for the Democratic debates. They have scheduled 6 debates for Democratic candidates, but only 4 of them are scheduled prior to the first caucus and primaries. Those 4 debates will start in October, with one in each of the early voting states of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. Now compare that to the 2008 presidential election. There were more than 20 Democratic debates. O'Malley says the DNC is only doing this to protect Hillary Clinton, and O'Malley is not alone. Senator Bernie Sanders is unhappy as well.
I think that at a time when so many of our people have given up on the political process, when 80% of young people did not vote in the last election, 63% of all Americans did not vote, I think debates are a good thing.
So if these candidates don't like having only 4 debates before the early voting states, then why not just go out and have their own debates, right? Well, that is part of the problem. See, according to this year's DNC rules, any candidate or debate sponsor wishing to participate in DNC debates must agree to participate exclusively in the DNC sanctioned process. Any violation would result in forfeiture of the ability to participate in the remainder of the debate process. So not only are there only 4 Democratic debates before the early primary states, but if candidates choose to take part in debates that are not sanctioned by the DNC, which, by the way, has happened in virtually every presidential election cycle, then they would, for the first time ever, be banned from taking part in the official debates.
I think that that is dead wrong, and I have let the leadership of the Democrats know that.
So what you need to know is that the DNC's response to all of this, a statement that says it's glad the candidates are passionate about debating and that over the course of the Democratic primary, 6 debates is plenty. 24 million people tuned into the first Republican debate. So the question is, why are Democrats hiding their message? Well, O'Malley and Sanders may certainly be right when they say that the DNC cares less about the Democratic message and much more about who the messenger will be. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
So what do you think? Is this something that is being done on purpose, or do you think that maybe even we could look at it and the Democrat Party goes, we're definitely going to lose this, even though I honestly think they would have a chance if they got behind the socialists, because a lot of the large areas of Democrats tend to be more socialist. You go out to, you go out there where Mark Dice is all the time. A lot of socialists out there. You go places like Chicago. There's a lot of socialists in Chicago. Communists. I think that if they really wanted to win, they would probably back someone like Bernie. But then they also know they can't control Bernie. I think that we are looking at something where they go, well, we could win, but we'd have to pick that guy. Therefore, we rather just tank ourselves. Hey, kind of like the 2012 election with the basically the manipulation, the rule breaking, the fake voting at the RNC, and the trashing of Ron Paul, and then giving him a nice farewell video at the end. Kicking delegates out, keeping delegates from a sector that was going to be mostly Ron Paul supporters, keeping them on a bus circling the RNC. Kind of like what the Republican Party did. They knew that really their main followers will end up going with whoever the RNC picks. But they knew that most of the Ron Paul supporters, if Ron Paul didn't get the nomination, would probably go Libertarian Party or not vote at all. They knew that. They knew that straight out. There might be people that don't want to admit, oh no, I would have never voted Ron Paul. I just vote, I'm the old school Republican. I like Bushes and stuff. Those people would end up voting Ron Paul just because he was a Republican nominee, because that's how they are. And there's Democrats like that too, where if they would go and get Bernie Sanders, the hard leftist that's not controllable, they probably could give the Republicans a run for their money. But they won't do that. And so it's probably a mix between not wanting to give them too much spotlight and willing to torpedo their election season. So, I think there's two things going on there. Okay. Now we heard in that Rand Paul video about Europe and their immigration problem right now. And there's quite a few articles on Drudge about it that you can go check out. probably been updated quite a few times here. Says here, Peter Foster has been speaking to those marching from Keletai railway station towards Austria, which is 110 miles away. Why do they treat us like dogs, like animals? No other country does this, said 18-year-old Salah Zuabi, a Syrian student who left the southern town of Dara 2 years ago for Egypt before crossing to Greece by boat and then land to Hungary. Like many on the march from Keletai rail station, Mr. Zuabi had paid 125 euros for a railway ticket to Austria, but had been unable to use it after the Hungarian authorities shut the international train lines in a bid to draw a line under the mass migration of recent months, which has seen 160,000 migrants enter Hungary this year. A UN report has put the number of refugees fleeing Syria at more than 1 million. Around half are children. Update here, Nick Squires in Bottom shared this. At the end of the hearing, the 4 men were charged with multiple manslaughter and people trafficking. They were remanded in custody. And that was after 4 Syrians formerly charged in Turkey over boat deaths. A prosecutor has charged 4 Syrian individuals over deaths of at least 12 people, including 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi, a local police chief, told Reuters. This from Reuters. Prosecutors charged the Syrians with smuggling migrants and causing multiple deaths by conscious negligence in connection with the drowning of the group after it set off from the Turkish resort peninsula of Bodrum. And it goes on with all kinds of updates. And then there was one on Infowars.com. Thousands of refugees walked from Budapest to Austria. Europe's immigration crisis deepened Friday as thousands of refugees began walking from a train station in Budapest, Hungary, to Vienna in Austria. The final destination, according to The Guardian, is Munich, Germany. Blocked from taking trains to the destination for security reasons, the group of mostly Syrian refugees set out on foot to travel the 105-mile route. A social media campaign has been created to organize a convoy of private drivers to take many of the refugees to Austria, according to France 24. The Austrian government has responded by emphasizing that aiding illegal immigration is against the law and carries up to a €5,000 fine, which is $5,500. Germany expects 800,000 refugees this year, up from 200,000 last year. More than 4 million more wait to enter Europe from camps in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. The unfolding humanitarian crisis in Europe, the largest since the Second World War, is a direct result of the effort by the United States and Gulf Emirates to overthrow the Syrian government. And I'm going to play a short clip here.
Frustrations with refugees at Keletai train station in downtown Budapest, Hungary have boiled over today, with thousands of refugees taking to the streets to march to Vienna, Germany. There's mixed reports. I don't it's hard to say whether people actually know where they're going. There's a lot of confusion, but people have taken it upon themselves to leave the station and migrate elsewhere.
And that clip was from the Globe and Mail. It's Canadian. Now, you probably have a lot going to maybe Munich, Germany. You probably also have some going, you know, another little group of refugees going, I think we should go this way because everybody's going that way. And I think we should try somewhere different. And I heard this place was nice. And you're going to have different people going different ways. You have people not knowing. You got kind of tugging different ways. But I think there's a bigger picture because we're also seeing the same type of immigration thing going on here in the U.S. and it's not being talked about as broadly, and you don't hear it being talked about as broadly by Rand Paul. And when you do hear it being talked about by Republican candidates, a lot of it's kind of more of a inciting of hate type manner. Not words directly, but a manner in which they speak about the issue. And a lot of it misses the bigger picture. And I think there's not only, I think, the war, but it seems like there's being pressure put on certain areas of the world. And it seems that they're flooding the Western world. Not just, you know, the United States or Britain or, you know, other places. They're doing it to the whole Western world. And it almost seems like it's a coordinated effort. And you look at that and you could almost see how they're hurting people into smaller areas of the world. And I mentioned this to someone. It just kind of started coming to me. And I'm like, I never really looked at it before, but it's almost like they're purging areas of the world where the only people left behind are all these militant type people. They can bomb them and just devastate that area. And in a sense, if you look through which I can't even name half of what I've seen and read that was published by groups in the United Nations, and it kind of goes along with what they want and need to do. You look at places like India, which are dense with people, and you see what they did to India, where they basically biometric scanned the entire populace. Fingerprint, iris scan, DNA samples, facial recognition scan. We're looking at a world that is really being completely reshaped. And I don't think we understand the full consequences of it yet. It in the long run, well, not even in the long run, we're seeing it right now. We're seeing cities working extremely hard to make these small housing metropolises. They want condos and apartments. They don't want single-family homes, duplexes. They'll take those in the suburban areas, but they're pushing really hard to even get the rich people to, which I wouldn't even say they're rich compared to the ultra rich, but most of society would look at them going, they're rich. Trying to pull them into the city where they're creating these little areas with all these restrictions. That way it'll please those type of people, and then building these condos using taxpayer money to do it a lot of times, partially pay for it through subsidies and taxpayer money, and then get tax breaks on top of it, and then the private investor that only invested so much banks on it. But then they create these condos and they sell them for extraordinary amounts of money. And a lot of times it's revitalization and all this. And when you go revitalization, I'm for that. I think our city needs to clean up and, look better. And yeah, we'll do a little bit of that, where they can build these condos and then allow these outside companies to come in, and more taxpayer money is used to clean up for these businesses to be able to come in from out of state and put a business up. Well, you're benefiting. Well, yeah, after all my taxpayer money was spent on doing it, and then I have to ask permission to work for these people and make money, and a little bit of money compared to these people. That's the problem. The subsidy, again, it comes back to money's taken from you to pay for someone else's benefit. You not being able to just directly benefit off of your own. And most people that do benefit, even a lot of these people that aren't really ultra rich or nothing, but they got a good amount of money and they make a good amount of money. They invest back in their community. They do things to, help, but they're also robbed of money. And then when it's used to benefit others that, shouldn't be benefiting off of other people's cash, definitely when you have these ultra rich come in and benefit through subsidies and taxpayer money, helping to develop areas, and it becomes an issue. Okay, give me a second here. Now, with all this tension going on, we have tension with Russia, we have tension with China, we have Chinese in the Bering Sea close to Alaska, we got Russia doing the same type of stuff, flying near our airspace, into our airspace. We have the Middle East completely unhinged with our weaponry. And then we have our own government kind of coming in on us. I have another Ron Paul Liberty report. This will hopefully, yeah, okay. This will be the last clip I try to play here. I want to finish off with some articles. So let me go ahead and play this. We'll get into some of the tensions here between China, Russia, the U.S., and even Europe. We'll get in that right after this. Ron Paul Liberty Report, War Drums Beating Real or Imagined?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Daniel McAdams is with me today, and it's good to see you, Daniel.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul. Good morning.
like to talk today a little bit about some various events going around the world, because there's a lot of propaganda out there, a lot of threats and intimidations, and sometimes I think we just invite it because we're involved in so many places. But, we heard the story about the Chinese are coming. The Chinese are coming. Are they going to invade Alaska? And we want to, try to put the proper balance on that. And, of course, there's always propaganda how the Ruskies are about to invade. And I haven't seen them getting ready for a beachhead, and I haven't seen the Russians doing what the Soviets did on putting missiles down in Cuba. And, of course, we read the story about us placing drones in Latvia. So it's on and on. And the question is these war drums beating? Are they real, or is it imaginary? Is it propaganda, or should we ignore it? Let's start with, the headline about China putting ships near Alaska. What kind of significance can we place on that?
Well, I think there is one, and you might say that they're sending a signal. I think there's a strange symbiosis among the Beltway think tanks and the Chinese military, because CSIS, for example, which is a Beltway think tank that gets a lot of defense money, one of their experts said the Chinese Navy is going global. It's a big threat. They're right off our shores, and of course that might be a departure. But I was looking in July, the U.S. launched a major littoral combat ship that they said is going to be great because it's going to be patrolling the South China Seas.
Yeah. Well, I think they want to let everybody know that they're not a bunch of wimps and they don't want to get pushed around. I'd like them to react more like the Swiss react. They don't have to. They're not so insecure that they have to show they're strong, and yet they've been able to defend themselves. But that's not yet to come. And of course, we have to deal with the constant antagonisms between Russia and the United States. In spite of the fact that we depend on Russia to go to the space station, it amazes me that we go back and forth. But I would call it provocative for the United States to put drones, not a ton of them, but right on the borders of Russia and Latvia. And I don't know if you noticed, but the people who were going to man these drones was Texas Air National Guard. I thought they were supposed to be here protecting us or something, but here we have the Air National Texas Guard over in Latvia. It seems like the Russians should have a little bit to complain about on that.
You think about it in a sense. The Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia being in NATO confirmed the worst fears of Russia. Why they didn't want them to join NATO, which is they didn't want offensive military weapons on their border. And this is exactly what the case is. And of course, CNN, I was reading earlier, talking about this, and they portray it as that this is in response to Russia's actions in Ukraine. Whether you believe they invaded or not, there's not been much evidence of it, but in what way does it affect the U.S.?
Yes, and we have to question exactly where some of the information comes. In particular, the stirring the pot about the Russians ready to send the troops, battle-ready troops to Syria. Big announcement, and then the next day it was denied, and I'm sure Russia has an interest in Syria. They have a station there, and we know they're sympathetic to Assad. But the way the headlines were written was that they were sending implied combat troops. But then when we looked around to find out where they got this information, all of a sudden it was a single source, and it was not very thorough in telling us exactly who knew these troops were on their way to Syria.
There was a fellow by the name of Fishman, and he wrote for a news site called Ynet, which is an Israeli news outfit. And if you look through the original article, which was copied by many other articles, many other publications, there really was no sourcing for it. It was all unnamed sources, but it was very scary. Thousands of Russians ready to land in Syria. Interestingly enough, we talked about the Chinese. This also, in a way, appeals to both the U.S. neocons and the super pro-Russia people who think Russia's going to save the day. And both of them have a lot of wishful thinking that I think clouds their analysis and doesn't let them see things. So they're reading into this what they want to, but I certainly have seen no evidence. I think even the U.S. military spokesman said that there's really no evidence that they...
Well, I don't think we're at a point where, in a short period of time, a week, a month, or a year, that you're going to see massive movement of troops. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure that's ever going to happen again like it did in World War I and World War II. But I can see the world becoming more dangerous, and these para-government forces, the independent sources and the terrorist approach as a reaction to what we do. I think that's going to continue. But we will see the propaganda building up, mainly to put fear. Fear is always a driving force. It's a political tool that people use, but it's also a political tool used to enhance people who make profits. But the danger that I see is that they don't have control of it. Yeah, let's go back and forth here. The Russians aren't going to do this. We still do business with them. We still can travel there. They're not going to do it. But someday something might get out of hand. And as conditions worsen, yesterday we talked about the mass migration into Europe, which is like an explosion, an invasion, and this destabilizing. And then, of course, the wars aren't ending in the Middle East. So this continues. So it would not be too difficult to see some of this stuff getting out of control and having an unintended consequence or a false flag, even if maybe there's somebody in our government or some other government said, well, let's do this, and this will justify an escalation. So that, to me, is what I think is the real danger.
Well, I think, as the interventions fail one after the other, we see now Libya, that was supposed to be easy. We see Iraq was supposed to be a cakewalk. We see Syria was supposed to be a smooth transition to democracy. But as these fail, I think there's some desperation that sets in, because I don't think there really is an articulated strategy of the United States for foreign policy. But I think, unfortunately, and you've said this before, and this desperation comes out in something like we talked about yesterday when Petraeus says maybe we need to ally with Al-Qaeda. The sad thing is what you've always said, when this crisis comes, they're probably not going to immediately turn to us and turn to you and non-interventionism. First, they may turn to someone like Petraeus and go even further down the path toward disaster.
And that's what it sounds like, the fact that Petraeus is getting this much attention. You'd think maybe he had discredited himself a little bit, but no, they still look to him. And he, of course, was claiming, and others claim, that he solved the problems of Iraq and brought about a peaceful settlement when they had the escalation and the surge. And also, though, he was very much involved in the CIA when the difficulties started in Ukraine, when an elected government was thrown out. So you're right; they go back to these same people again, and there's further escalation. And I think sometimes it's difficult. I don't think I personally can say that these war drums are not real at all. Forget about them. And but I don't think they're imaginary either. I think there's stuff going on, and I worry about the unintended consequences and things getting out of control and not knowing exactly what the other side might do, because it can change rather suddenly.
One of the solutions in Syria is really to do what you've said all along in Iraq, which is to just come home. We don't have troops on the ground there, but if we would stop trying to prop up an imaginary force over another imaginary force, if we'd step back, maybe Syria would look to Iran. We certainly wouldn't have to encourage it, but if we step back out of there, there would be a solution to the problem. ISIS would be defeated in one way or another, and maybe some of these people that have gone to Europe might come back and help rebuild the country.
There was a very famous person in our recent history, George Kennan, foreign policy expert. He was sort of the realist leader, and he was considered the author of Containment. And the conditions back then might have made a stronger argument for containment, even though I wouldn't have agreed with all the foreign policy. But it was, you don't invade Russia, but you contain Russia and stuff. But at least he was very well known for that. But as he got older, and I know you're very much aware of this, when he got older, he was writing things different. In one of his statements, it was rather interesting. He says, we still have to deal with containment. We have to contain the United States. And he was putting the blame. He would be a very interesting person to interview today, wouldn't he? To talk about containment. He probably wouldn't agree with our total non-intervention, but he would, I bet we could find a lot to agree with, that We need to contain some of our policies, like why are we putting drones in Latvia? Maybe it's time to do more talking.
And they'd want to tag us. We're always complaining about the U.S. We're somehow anti-American or unpatriotic, but it is patriotic to contain the un-American instincts of a globalist foreign policy, of the military-industrial complex that's impoverishing us and irritating the rest of the world. They're not making us any safer.
Right. I think we're more or less on a collision course in many areas in the world today, because I've said many times that the Keynesian economic model doesn't work. The model that we have for foreign policy of constant intervention and spending and deficit, that doesn't work either. But the world's been engulfed by our policies and our influence, both with our military and our influence, because we have the reserve dollar. So if we'd have spent a lot more energy, voluntarily of course, to probably convince more people, say in Africa, to accept the ideas of liberty and free markets, maybe we could have had a Hong Kong or something like that that could develop in Africa. But instead, we have this failed system, and this leads to then the breakdown, and we ended up with competing devaluations and protectionism, and also mass migration. So this is what we're up against right now. And then this leads, because people are getting poorer, and it's very popular politically in this country as well as elsewhere to be a populist. I'm going to take care of the people, without changing policy, just more government redistribution of wealth. And we're in the midst of that, and they're not really considering seriously a policy that makes sense, which would be free markets and individual liberties. So the protectionist model usually ends up into, war propaganda. If we just spent more money on weapons, we'll get out of this mess. But then there are some people who actually believe the answer to this is war. People still believe that we got out of the Depression because we killed millions of people in World War II. What an answer. But there are people who believe that, and too often this set of standards go and they move us in that direction. At first you hear these problems, the economic problems, and you lead to military problems, and then you have a military interventionist foreign policy that we have that just aggravates and makes the Middle East chaos, and whether it's just in the Middle East or Ukraine or wherever, leads to a very, very dangerous situation. So yes, this talk of war and the militarization of other countries now is serious. I think we have enough time to bring some common sense to people. So what we need to do is work much harder to present the case for liberty and free markets and get away from this dependency on more government, more spending, and more war. That is what is dangerous, and that's not what America is all about. Hopefully so. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back.
Ron Paul Liberty Report. Check them out on YouTube. Ron Paul Liberty Report. And that was War Drums Beating Real or Imagined. And it really is something that has been pretty much in the spotlight for the last 15 years, 20 years, even 30, 40, 50. Really, we have not seen any true peace, because every time we think we have peace, then we have another enemy. And again, it really does seem like we are changing the complete geographic of the world every time we go through these. Give me a second here. The issue again. Okay. We look at the people that tend not to get hurt too much through all this. Well, you think about World War II. Think about Great Britain and everything it went through. Everything that was destroyed through bombings, London. How did the royal family do out in this situation? Everybody else lost their living. Their job was picking up the bricks of the building that used to stand there and house everything that they invested their lives into. Well, at the same time, here's one from Infowars.com. Did you know the royal family has ties to Hitler? And it says here, The Sun published a secret 1933 film, which I've went over this once, but it says here, showing Queen Elizabeth being taught the Nazi salute by her treasonous Uncle Edward VIII, the Prince of Wales. He would later be known as King Edward VIII and Emperor of India, but would be quietly removed from the throne less than 12 months later as he remained pro-Nazi even after the war accelerated. So how far back does the German aristocrat parasite occupy the English throne? And that's just one example of, how they side both sides of these wars. They fund them, they arm them. And we see the same thing with what the U.S. kind of does, but even behind that, it gets done in a much larger global scale. And you bet that a lot of the royal family's money went to the Nazis. A lot of them supported him early on. Quite a few of them supported him pretty far through. Maybe a couple of them supported him when he was at his most craziest bombing Britain. Well, you look at some families that were able to buy Hitler off. You best bet that the royals felt that they were going to be okay. I think a lot of it would have came down to whether they agreed with the society that Hitler was creating. But we know that we do have sides that fight over global control. Whether it be between Russia, China, U.S., whether it be between globalists and their ideology. It's constantly going on. Now we know we helped create Al-Qaeda because of the Soviets. And we fought Al-Qaeda. Most of Al-Qaeda became ISIS. Well, you heard a little snippet from Ron Paul about former General Petraeus and him wanting to use Al-Qaeda. I'm going to have to play this clip. I was going to try not to. Well, I don't know if I can. We'll play it real quick here. It's not too long, so it should be okay.
Former CIA Director General David Petraeus has been reportedly talking to U.S. lawmakers, pushing an idea to use al-Qaeda fighters to take down ISIS. Sounds strange? It is controversial, but would it work? This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. Who oversaw the Iraq surge in 2006 and 2007 and the Afghanistan strategy under President Obama is quietly behind the scenes pushing lawmakers to embrace a new strategy against ISIS. That strategy to arm members of the group al-Nusra Front. Here's what Petraeus told CNN. We should under no circumstances try to use or co-opt Nusra, an al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, as an organization against ISIL. But some individual fighters and perhaps some elements within Nusra today have undoubtedly joined for opportunistic rather than ideological reasons. They saw Nusra as a strong horse, and yet they haven't seen a credible alternative, as the moderate opposition has yet to be adequately resourced. So who is al-Nusra Front? Well, the simplest way to describe them, they are al-Qaeda in Syria. Yes, connected to the same al-Qaeda who 14 years ago we began a war with over the September 11 attacks. But what you may not know is that the U.S. has already accidentally funded al-Nusra. In 2012, when the U.S. was pushing for the overthrow of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, the U.S. sent guns, body armor, satellite radios, and money to a group called the Free Syrian Army. But shortly after doing that, most of those FSA fighters defected, and they joined al-Nusra Front. In 2013, the U.S. officially declared al-Nusra a terror organization. So how are lawmakers responding to this idea? Again, according to a report by the Daily Beast, U.S. officials interviewed by the Beast found Petraeus' notion politically toxic, near impossible to execute, and strategically risky. And the biggest reason for that, what is a moderate member of al-Qaeda? Senator John McCain talks about moderate rebels all the time, but where are these people? So what you need to know is that the U.S. has already committed $500 million in weapons and training to so-called moderate rebels in Syria. That program to train moderate fighters is hoping to train and release 15,000 fighters each year over the next 3 years. That was the plan. So how's it going? Well, the first group in that project had been trained and they have been put into the field. There were 54 of them, and they officially started last month. Already, some have abandoned the program and gone back to their homes in Syria. 13 others were captured by al-Nusra Front, the group Petraeus wants to recruit from to take on ISIS. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight.
Ben Swan, Reality Check, truthmedia.com, formerly benswan.com. Now, we constantly play these little battles, we used to call them entangling alliances. Things that we should be avoiding. And, you say you shouldn't intervene. People go, oh, you're isolationist. No, I don't want to isolate myself. That's what intervening does. It ends up isolating the American people into this group that's always meddling around in people's business. And whether we agree with it or not, when the government goes around doing it in the name of us, that's what people see. That's what people get. That's what they think we are. But look at our society now. Everybody's always meddling in everybody's business, forcing them to go along with things that they don't agree with or spiritually against or just think is offensive, morally wrong. Can't just let people live their lives. You end up trying to force things on them. And, I don't think that having a show on TV that shows gay people should be just, banned. I also don't think that they should use television to pit gay into everything to make it politically correct. It becomes something where, it's okay, but you start seeing something when it becomes a part of everything. And of course, it's used in a propaganda way, and you'll have some libertarians, oh, that's just homo. I don't care. That's the thing. I don't care. Do whatever you do. I'm just pointing out that it is being pushed into every TV program almost out there. And when, a Christian group, or even just, maybe an atheist group that still has more of a conservative lifestyle without the religion part, put out any type of programming or a movie that doesn't put politically correct stuff injected into it, they're bashed on any of these critics, websites, even when they get good audience ratings. So, there's a movement going on, and that doesn't mean we hate on any groups. Everybody should be able to live their lives as they choose, as long as they're not abridging the rights of others. And that's a message that seems lost in our society, and we need to continue to spread it. Because the direction we're going is everybody fighting each other. And we got people robbing us blind. Divide and conquer, and they're conquering the hell out of us. They're conquering the hell out of our wallets, our wealth, and our freedom. You got these bozos up here pushing rhetoric because you are being forced into all this stuff and, pushed into things. And then you have groups being manipulated and pushing for these things, not knowing they're just pushing for more government control and not really any more freedom. And it's just sad watching it happen, because really, if we could just focus on our own lives and not have to have our wealth and freedom robbed from us, we'd probably get along a hell of a lot better. But we have too many people buying into it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight, and I'll catch you next Wednesday. Don't forget to check out the UCY store, partnered with Amazon. Same great prices, and you're helping Alternative Network out, ucy.tv. Click the UCY store tab and check out all the gear. Great collection of prepping, camping, and radiation preparation gear, all in one place, easy for you to find. And again, thank you all for tuning in. I hope that, the message of freedom is continually spread, because we need it to be a vital part of the conversation in America and throughout the world, for us to break this government hold upon populace where they can have us fighting each other and using us as tools for their own profit and gain, and these dynasties that they want to create. We really need to get down to the fundamentals of freedom, and hopefully we can get there if